Hey, namaste, welcome. I am recording this on a cold, wet, and windy afternoon, hence why I have my fire going next to me. And that's kind of what I want to talk about in some ways is the seasons, the cycle, the cycle of nature that we see day to day outside or that slowly changes in the environment around us, but that also is a huge part of everything in life. Everything is a cycle, but it's one of the things that's been forgotten, or one of the things that we potentially as a society don't work with. We try to kind of jump certain um, certain parts of the cycle because we prefer to be in others, and that's a kind of societal norm and something that we are encouraged to do in childhood. And yeah, so that links so closely to menstruation, but to everything in life, and I think in that way, that's why menstruation feels like a gateway, like a way to almost, if we can, if as a gender, as women, if we can kind of connect with menstruation as a natural phenomenon is one thing, and connect with it as a cycle, because obviously there has been and there continues to be many connotations with the monthly bleed, and the fact that for between 3 to 8 days a month a woman experiences bleeding, a menstruating woman experiences bleeding. And obviously in so many cultures around the world, including Western culture, because it's still such a taboo subject, that is seen to be a negative phase. And there are always so many kind of teasing phrases and negative connotations that come with that point of the month. But of course, because it is a cycle, and we learn this, in school, but because it is a cycle, it does, just because the bleed only happens once a month, it doesn't mean that things aren't happening for the rest of the month. But because they're not visible, they're not something that are not something that we can see visibly on the outside of the body. It's something that's much easier to kind of uh, push to the side and not acknowledge in the way that a physical bleed has to be acknowledged because of the physical kind of practicalities of managing it. And so that obviously there's one thing, which is the menstruation itself, but the other thing is to really honor the entire cycle, and then see menstruation and the bleed as one part of that cycle, and almost the context that that brings means that we can honor and see how the cycle kind of gifts us in a way that if you just look at a menstruation as an anomaly, as a kind of point of the month which is separate to the rest of the month, then of course it's going to have its kind of negativities around it because it seemed to be different. But actually there is a lot of women who kind of are really in touch with their cycle. They kind of comment on the fact that they're actually 28 or 29 different women in a month, because each day, if we really work with the cycle and look at how almost the seasons and the sections of the cycle affect us differently, then you almost can, you're much more, it's an opportunity to be much more in touch with who you are as a woman on each day, and to tap into that power and to see that the emotions that might be for each woman, this is different, and that's why it's such a personal journey and something that you almost have to invite and allow yourself to delve into, which is for me incredibly exciting. That not one person can be told. It's not like maths, it's not like there's no answer, there's no kind of on this day you will definitely feel like this. It's like an invitation for each woman to delve into her own journey, and there's no one that can tell you what's right or wrong. It's asking you to really trust the intuition, trust the knowledge that's deep within the womb, and that's scary. That can be really scary because we're not kind of encouraged to do that. And it's estimated that it's been 35,000 years since there was a matriarchal society, which is a pretty long time in our kind of mindset, but I guess in the grand scheme of the universe, of the cosmos, it's actually fairly recent. And it does really feel like with what is happening now, and the opportunities that are being gifted to women to really, and the questions that people are asking, which encourages us to step away from what has become normal and society has created to become normal, and questioning whether that actually serves us all in the way that it could do, and whether there's a way to be more intuitive and work more with nature. Especially, I think what we're seeing in nature right now, the way that nature is fighting back in terms of the way that humans have treated the planet, and nature is showing showing us quite clearly that she is way more powerful than we are. It's an opportunity, it's an invitation from her, from Mother Nature, to ask us, do you want to keep fighting me, or do you want to work with me? And one way that we can start to do that on a very, I don't want to say small scale, because actually the potential power of millions of women working with their bodies is just incredible. So yeah, obviously we know we have the menstruation point of the month, which can last for between 3 to 8 days, and that is the bleed phase. And that phase, in terms of, if we relate it to the seasons, that phase is seen to be winter. And obviously winter, like I was referring to at the beginning of the video, is a time when you want to kind of slow down a bit, live with the light, take it easy, have some afternoons maybe indoors, taking a step back from the things that you would normally be doing in life. And of course, the sun and the amount of light that we have really influences that, and historically has definitely influenced that before we had the technology that we have now. So that's kind of a starting point to think about. But then, what about the rest of the seasons? Because as far as our body's physical appearance or our physical symptom, the other seasons have less physical symptoms, but they definitely don't go unnoticed. There's definitely emotional and hormonal and feelings that are kind of released and influenced by the different seasons. So the first season after the winter period is spring, and this period traditionally is believed to be between 7 and 8 days. So it's almost that kind of, like we see in nature, it's like things are starting to awaken, but it's still quite slow. Things are not, like, the buds are starting to come up, but they're not, there's not fully formed to them yet. They're like showing their shapes, but there's nothing fully opening, and we don't know how that might look in its full form, but it's like, the chick coming out of the egg. And this time is still seen as a time for dreaming, for starting to kind of awaken the body, awaken the mind slowly, without force, without being pushed into doing things. So there's an element of creativity coming in, but it's in a much more kind of whimsical way. Then we move into the summer, which is ovulation phase, and that is normally 3 to 4 days. And the irony is that these 3 to 4 days are kind of what society wants us to be all the time. So this is your real, full power, full energy full creativity, stepping into kind of this kind of complete openness to be out there. It's fire, it's yang, it's real kind of unharnessed energy. But that only lasts for 3 to 4 days. I say only, but you know, you can, if you know when your 3 to 4 days are, there is a lot of potential in realizing that energy and utilizing it in a way that currently, if it's not something that's aware of, it's kind of unutilized. It's not utilized. So that's the irony, really, is that the whole way that we are encouraged to be, it actually equates to 3 to 4 days of the month if we work with the women's cycle. Then we move into a period kind of which is more like late summer, when things are starting to kind of turn, but in a way that's still, the long evenings are still there. We've got that kind of Indian summer type feeling of relaxation, but kind of less of that kind of May, June real like freshness when all of the flowers come out and everything's suddenly green and fresh and full, which is the ovulation phase. But yeah, the late summer is more of things start to slow down a little, but we've still got the leaves on the trees. Everything's still very green, but we're starting to come back to ourselves, starting to come back into like seeing what has occurred and what has manifested itself within the ovulation phase, but just kind of starting to bring that back in. So yeah, so in some kind of cycle descriptions, that's called the inward spiral, where we start to, if we think of the spring being the outward spiral, and we're kind of opening ourselves up and releasing whatever, opening up the flowers, the leaves, I suppose, like things are unfurling. And the late summer, the inward spiral is when things are starting to come back in towards the self and starting to bring in an element of reflection. And then the last 5 to 6 days before the bleed is kind of the preparation phase. So it's really like an autumn phase, where if you think about animals in nature, they would be starting to kind of create their beds for the winter. Leaves are falling from the trees and creating kind of nesting areas under that for kind of all the bugs and things to start to really like break things down. And it is again a time to start to really conclude things, you know, to kind of see what's been left, what ends of stories have not been concluded from the late summer, from this kind of period of real energy, of real kind of giving. Because I suppose that's the other way to see it, is that spring and summer, it's all like starting, it's releasing and opening, and then this is a little bit more, autumn's a bit more of the taking, and it's starting to come back to you. And this can also obviously when people start to think in kind of terms of PMS and all of these kind of negative terms that have been given and that brings shame. That's that's the only way to think of it. It brings a shame around menstruation when people say, oh, you know, you're really moody today, is your period coming? But actually that is part of the autumn. It can be part of the autumn effect, because there's an element of, I don't want to leave that stuff like open and undealt with and not dealt with. So I'm going to be more blunt and more direct about things that I want, because when it comes to the winter period and I'm like wanting to hibernate and kind of take a step back and really have that time to integrate everything in my metaphorical cocoon, in my kind of bear cave where I've bedded down for my few days of winter, I don't want those things still hanging over me. So there's an element where often it manifests as a bluntness, as a more direct less patience and potentially more of a temper, but it's not coming from a place of negativity. It's coming from a place of let's just sort these things out in preparation for relaxation, for going inward. And yeah, that's a really, there's so much reading, so much incredible knowledge and incredible trainings and things happening out there, which can take us much, much deeper. And maybe in the future, that's something that I'd love to do. I'd love to be sharing these things in a more kind of wide environment, in more depth also. But if we take that into consideration in terms of how this is, how menstruation is treated in countries and in cultures like in Nepal, where women are potentially separated from their families and not allowed to touch food, or they're allowed to eat their own food, but they're not allowed to touch food being prepared for other people because they are seen to be impure and dirty and therefore will contaminate the food. They're not allowed to go to any kind of religious places, and all of these kind of deeply embedded cultures. And in some ways, this idea of separation is honoring this system that the seasons that I've just kind of very briefly gone over, and the opportunity there is to see it as an opportunity, as a possibility of rest, as a space of rest, as a space of honor and giving the woman a break. But of course, the way that it's been manipulated, and in the society that has grown over the last centuries, there's just this misinterpretation that it's all because the woman is dirty. When of course, in fact, that woman would be unable to reproduce children, would be unable to continue to populate the country if she did not have this menstruation. But also the fact that the rest of the cycle is absolutely, fine. It's absolutely fine for women to be working, caring for children, touching everything, being involved in all of the festivals and celebrations, but just for these, it's normally 3 to 5 days that they are separated. In some ways that, the whole picture is not being honoured. It's just one portion of the cycle that's being picked out as the negative part. And again, I think that's something that could really be explored, and is something that I'm very passionate about bringing into some of the work that we're doing, is looking at whether the full breadth of the cycle is really appreciated, because I think if the context is there, the view and the kind of interpretation is very different. So yes, I felt there's a real opportunity and potential there to see that this way that menstruation is currently viewed is only looking at one part of the cycle, and to give it that context would create a different interpretation of what it means, what it is. And currently there's quite a lot of the charities that offer like a kind of a menstrual bracelet which has 28 beads, and you have the 5 days of bleed, so you can kind of track your cycle. And things like this are a great way to kind of bring an element of creativity and an element of kind of interaction. But say again, it's just that just breaks it into two separate things, into like good and bad, or bleeding, not bleeding. But there's so much more to it than that. There's so much more to just bleeding and not bleeding. It's a case of maybe if we had the 5 cycles, for example, 4 seasons, but there's kind of 5 sections to that with this sort of summer and late summer. If we break it down into those 5 sections, then it's really making the physical act of the blood loss being less, not less important, but it has less, there's less weight around it because there's so many other parts of it to explore, and there's power in that. There's power in women understanding that there's a bigger part of the cycle which can be an education in itself, and we don't need to go to school for that. We don't need to pay for that even. It's just taking a little bit of time to really tap into what your body is telling you and what day you're on, which could then kind of influence some of the feelings that you're having and some of the ways that some of the tasks that you might choose to do. So yeah, this is all things that I'm very passionate about, but things that are all kind of work in progress, and I'm almost, like I said in my last video, I'm almost needing to start to say them, voice them out loud, to release them, to have people hopefully hear them, to see how they then develop and grow, and what potentially can come from that, because it needs for, which is happening, but it needs for lots of people to come together and kind of create the change, as a unit, and for more people, more women, to have that passion to take it forward to the next level. So yeah, it's it's part of my releasing, my unfurling in my springtime, which is the week that I'm in right now, is this idea of unfurling and starting to kind of dream about where this work could take us. So I leave it there for now, but namaste and thank you for listening.